Viewers like you make this program possible. Support your local PBS station.
The French Chef is made possible by a grant from Safeway stores.
To the delicious aroma of sizzling bacon, add chicken and garlic and herbs and mushrooms and onions and red wine. And what do you have? Coq au vin, one of the most delicious chicken dishes you ever put in your mouth. We're going to do it today on The French Chef. Welcome to The French Chef. I'm Julia Child. Today we're going to do coq au vin, chicken and red wine. It's one of the best and I think one of the most famous French chicken dishes, and it's the kind of a recipe a lot of people order when they go out to a restaurant. And restaurants love to have coq au vin on the menu because it's the kind of a dish they can cook way ahead of time. And that's one reason it's a very good one for us to have in our repertoire, because it's easy to do and it's a great party dish. So we're going to start right in on it. We have our chicken here, which is a frying chicken, and it is going to brown in bacon fat. So I've got these little pieces of bacon in here which are rendering their fat, and this is blanched bacon. That means that it's been cut up and then simmered for 10 minutes in water and then drained, and it's simmered so that you remove all of the bacony, smoky taste. And if you didn't remove it, everything would taste like bacon, and it's supposed to taste like chicken and red wine. And here is our chicken, and this is the way you usually buy it in a supermarket. It has been just sawed apart rather than disjointed, and that's one reason that it makes it inexpensive to buy. They have a great big machine, and it just cuts the chicken down the backbone, and then whish, whish, and it's cut into 4 pieces. And it makes it rather hard to brown and rather hard to eat, because you have here the wing and the breast section. And when you turn it over, you have all of the ribs and a little part of the backbone, and it's very hard to brown because it's sort of curved that way. And so I think it's a very good idea to fix it up at home. You don't have to fix it up at home, but it makes it easier to brown and easier to eat. So this is a frying chicken, I guess I said, and we want to make the wing a nice piece to eat, so we will cut a little bit of the breast off with the wing. So you just come right along the carcass there, and then you find your ball joint and just cut right through it, and then just scrape the meat from the bone there. I've got a littler knife. It's good to have quite a selection of knives, and be sure that you have good sharp knives, because you just can't do anything in cooking if you don't. The end part of it you can just peel off. It peels very easily, and there you have your nice little wing piece with the breast attached, and that makes one perfectly good serving. And then you have your breast here. There's the breastbone there, and those are the ribs down there. And we've taken all the meat off the ribs, so we can just take a big kitchen shears and just cut that right off. See, so now you've got a nice 1 serving piece of breast, and it doesn't have all of that rib cage hanging on, which makes it much harder to brown. And now we have our drumstick and our second joint. And these we want to separate, and you can tell how to separate by taking the 2 ends of it and wiggling it and feeling where the 2 join with your finger. And then you just take a knife and cut right through that. Well, it should cut easier. I think it's easier on this side. There. Now you have your drumstick. Now there's your second joint, and then this again, because of the saw treatment, has a big piece of back on it. And you can remove that if you like. I think it's a good idea to. And to do so, you just take a knife and then cut just against this backbone here. Now none of this you have to do, but I think it makes a prettier chicken, and it's much easier to eat. You know, a lot of people get awfully mixed up. They don't know how the chicken is put together, and they get sort of confused when they have this piece of back. Now here, you see there is your ball joint there, and that you just, again, cut right through. And then you can just pull it apart, and there you have that little piece of back, which is of no use at all. And that, but I mean, it is of use if you want to use it in your stock pot, if you're making a little sauce. So there we have breast, we have 2 drumsticks, and we have 2 second joints, and we have our 2 wings. This was a breast cut in a different way. And so now we're going to brown them in our bacon fat. And the important thing is, when you're going to brown anything, is that it be perfectly dry. And either take a towel or paper towels and dry each piece off, because you're not going to be able to brown any kind of meat if it is damp. And I'm going to use one of these electric frying pans, because I think they're rather fun, because you can cook any place in the kitchen where you have an electric plug. Now we put in our dried chicken skin side down. I should have taken the bacon out first, which I will now. Then the bacon will go in again after we have the chicken brown, because it's going to cook with the chicken and give more flavor to the sauce. And then in go 2 drumsticks. And there is a piece of breast. That's cut in the French way, where you cut the whole breast apart, sort of in half, crosswise. There's a little piece of extra fat on that piece of chicken. I'm going to cut that off. Sort of extra fat and skin. And now another thing is, whenever you're going to brown anything, you want to be sure that your fat is hot. On this frying pan, I'm cooking it at about 360 degrees. In other words, if you're going to brown something, the fat is hot, but it's not so hot that it's going to start burning. And the third thing is, do not crowd the pan. If you're going to double or triple a recipe like chicken, you'd have to saute it in several batches. See, this is about almost a 3-pound cut-up fryer, and we have 8 nice serving pieces, and this will serve 4 very hungry people, or 6 to 8 moderate eaters. And then we're just going to keep turning that until it's nicely brown, and while it is doing that, I'm going to start in on our onion garniture that we have. Now we're going to cook the onions, brown the onions in some olive oil. So I'm going to get that heated up. And we have peeled onions here. These are just these little white onions, and you say we were going to serve 4 people, you'd have about 4 onions this size for each. And to peel them easily, you drop the whole onion in simmering water and let it come up to the boil, and boil for just about half a minute or so, and then drain them, and then take them out as soon as they're cool enough to handle, and just take off just a little, just shave off the 2 ends of the onion like that. And then, as you see, I've already blanched these. The skin comes off very easily indeed. And then, because these are going to be braised, cooked in a liquid, then there are 2 ends, as you notice. There's one end that has sort of a little circle in it, and the other end in which all of the onion leaves meet. And this is the root end here that has a little circle in it. And take a little knife and pierce a little cross in it like that. And that, when the onions are simmering, they don't burst apart quite so easily. And so we put off all of our peeled onions into hot oil, and we just let them brown a little bit. They're not going to brown terribly thoroughly. It's just to give them a little bit of color. And we'll come back and look at our chicken. I think tongs are very useful to use. You just keep turning the chicken until it's nicely browned on all sides. And that doesn't mean that it's a black brown. It's a, sort of a nice, sort of nutty brown. And be sure that you don't let your fat burn. Just keep regulating your heat. And then we go back to our onions and shake them around. You see, those are beginning to brown, but they're not going to brown. It's sort of be a rather spotty brown, which is enough. And now we come back and look again at our chicken. You see, you can keep several things going at once here. That hasn't quite browned on that side. And then, when your chicken has browned, we're going to do what is known as the covered sweat, or the suet, as they call it in France. And this is an important part of the fricassee, which this is, in that after you've browned your chicken, you put on your salt and pepper on each side. And there's pepper. I would like to use a pepper mill because the pepper is much fresher tasting. And then you put on the cover and you let it cook very slowly. I'm going to lower this down to about 260. And then you let it cook very slowly for 5 minutes. I'm going to shake the onions again. Now take a look at those onions. That's just about the way they should be. It's just sort of a little brown all over. And then we're going to cook them covered. So I'm going to put in some water, about ½ an inch. And then they should have some salt. And we'll put in a little bit of butter, too, because the butter always helps to give a little sort of added flavor. And then I'm going to put them on a back burner with the cover on, and they're to cook very slowly for about ½ an hour until they're all done. And whenever you have a recipe that includes onions, little small braised onions along with them, it's much better to cook the onions first and then add it to your casserole or whatever it is you're cooking just before the end. Then you're sure that the onions are done. And now we will say that our chicken has sweated quietly for 5 minutes, so we turn it over on the other side, salt and pepper it again, and let it sweat quietly for 5 minutes more. And this is one of the great differences between the fricassee and the stew and the sauté. In the absolutely plain dry sauté, it cooks in an open pan, and in a stew, your chicken would cook in liquid from the start. You might have browned it a little bit first and then put your liquid in. But in the fricassee, it always has this sweating period which allows it to swell a little bit and become tender, and then the liquid goes in, and it gives a rather subtle but different taste. And then after this is done, its 10-minute covered cooking in all, then we're going to flame it in brandy. And this is something that you don't have to do, but it is rather fun to do so. But don't ever flame anything in brandy unless you're going to use a good one, like a French cognac, because otherwise you can get some of this awful rot gut stuff that says brandy, but it just tastes terrible and can ruin the taste of whatever you're doing. And so now when the brandy's gotten hot, you light a match and stand well away and let it flame. Now, I don't know as this does much of anything except make people feel good, because I'm not sure that it adds anything to the taste, but it's just sort of fun and it's part of the classical recipe. And then after that is flamed for a minute or two, you just put the cover on and that extinguishes the flame. And then we're going to put in our red wine, and I've got to add the bacon again. There it is. I didn't know where I'd put it. Then this was the bacon that we saw first, and that goes in. And then we're going to put in about 2 cups of red wine. And this should be a nice, young, full-bodied red wine. It can be a Burgundy or a Côte d'Aron, or I've very often used a California Mountain Red. It should be a dry, sturdy wine. And then we've got about 2 cups in there, and then I'm going to put in some beef stock. You can use canned beef bouillon if you want. And add it so that your chicken is not quite covered. And then we're going to put in about a teaspoon of dried thyme and 2 cloves of garlic. I'm just using that with the garlic press. And there's our 2nd clove. And then we're going to put in a bay leaf. I'll put in 2 bay leaves because they both fell in. And then we're going to put in 2 tablespoons of Italian type tomato paste. That's a good thick red type of tomato paste. And then stir it all up. We want to make sure that the tomato paste gets nicely mixed in with the sauce. See, that's all there is to it. It isn't really very complicated, though. I think just the name coq au vin sounds as though it were. And then you cover it, and that's to cook very slowly. I think at around 225, but keep looking at it until for about half an hour. And if you want to cook it in the oven, you put it in a 325 oven. Now that can just cook there slowly while I do the mushrooms. And the mushrooms, again, I'm going to do in oil, or you can do them in oil and butter. And these are, it's about a pound of fresh mushrooms cut in this is called quarters. They're sort of little triangles like that. And then again, as with in cooking and browning anything, because you want these to be lightly brown, you trim them, and then you wash them quickly by dumping them in a basin of cold water, lifting them out with your hands, and then drying them in the towel. They must be dry, and don't ever let mushrooms soak in water because they act like a sponge and just pick up all the water. Then as soon as your oil is hot, you pour in your mushrooms, and then we just shake them around for 2 or 3 minutes until they have browned lightly. They'll take about 5 minutes. And again, it's better to have your mushrooms cooked first. Besides the sautéed mushrooms, always just the slight browning gives them a much nicer taste. Now we'll take a look and see how our onions are doing. They should just be very slowly simmering. See, just like that. If you allow them to boil, they may very easily burst apart. But if you just keep them simmered, and if you find that your liquid has cooked away, just add a little bit more. And we'll take another look at our chicken. And that isn't quite simmering. I think I should have put it on a little higher. If I had put on my glasses, I would have seen what it was doing. But again, the chicken, like the onions, could cook very, very slowly, because also if it boils, then it sort of breaks apart and very often will toughen. Now we'll shake up our mushrooms. I'm using one of these no-stick pans, which I like very much, because they seem to be awfully easy to cook things in. And also I like the shape of these slanting sides and the long handle. And when you're cooking something like mushrooms, get used to the movement of shaking the pan like that, because it's much easier to cook them than if you had to turn around and turn them over. And now we have another chicken in the oven, and I'm going to get that out so we can make the sauce, because that is the most important part of it. There. Now that one has been brought up. This chicken here is exactly like the chicken that we've had in our electric cooker, but it is cooked in the casserole for about half an hour in a 325 oven. I want to show you how you can conclude that the chicken is done. You don't want the chicken to overcook. And I think a lot of people are inclined, say, to cook chicken 2 hours. But actually a fryer, well, I'm going to shake the mushrooms again. Now, before I go back to the chicken, the mushrooms are now done. And you can tell they're done because they're browning very, very lightly. And when we put the oil in, the mushrooms absorb the oil. And then as soon as they begin exuding the oil, that means that they're done. You can see now they're sort of shiny. So they're done and they're all ready. And these you can cook ahead of time and just set aside. And now, how to tell when our chicken is done, very simply, is just lift up a piece, usually the drumstick, which is the longest to cook, and if a little knife goes into it easily, it's done. And if you can tell by sort of pressing it, when it's soft, it's done. Now, for the sauce. Oh, where'd I put my top? Oh, there it is. Sure that I have everything going here. Now, if you're using a casserole, just put the cover askew and have a big towel and clamp the cover on like that, and then just pour your sauce out. And we probably have about 3 cups of sauce there. I can see that my other chicken is going a little bit too fast. And then if there's any fat, and there probably will be, fat collected on top of the sauce, just tilt the pan and spoon it out. You just have to tilt it, and it's a rather long job to get all of the fat out, but with a chicken, luckily, there isn't too much. I don't really see very much fat there. And then let it come up to the boil. And then we're going to use a beurre manier, or a flour butter paste, to thicken the sauce with. And that's one of the sort of classic French thickenings, which I think we've done several times before, but it's a very easy emergency thickening. I said we had about 3 cups of sauce, so we'll want 2 tablespoons of butter, and about 3 tablespoons, always better to make a little bit more than a little bit less, and about 3 tablespoons of flour. There's 2. That's a little bit more than 3. And then take a rubber spatula, and if your butter is soft, it's very easy just to mix it all together into a paste. Manier means using the hands, and if you're in a hurry and your butter is if your butter is hard, if you squeeze it with your hands, of course, that softens it up. And now, when our sauce has come to the simmer, I can see that there's a little bit of scum on it there, and just skim that off. I'm not going to take the time to skim it all off because it still has a good flavor. And then we take the sauce off heat, and we have a wire whip, and then you just beat your beurre manier into the sauce. And be sure that before you add this beurre manier before you bring the sauce again to the simmer, that you beat up this butter and flour paste. And then you just want to let it come to the simmer, and when it's thick enough, it's ready to serve. And at the same time, or almost at the same time, I'll wait till this has come up to the simmer, then we'll add our onions and mushrooms and then let them cook for a moment. There, now that's come to the simmer, so in go our braised onions. This was made exactly the way we made the other ones, but I made some ahead so you can see how they'd be. And there are mushrooms, and they go in. Then that all should cook for just a moment or two so that we will blend the flavors of the sauce and the onions. And then we want to be sure and taste this, because it would be silly to go to all this work without being absolutely certain that it had a perfectly delicious flavor to it. That's very good. If you taste it before the wine is cooked down, it just tastes awful. It's sort of fun when you're cooking with wine to taste the sauce first and then taste it about every 10 minutes while it's cooking. And you see, the longer it cooks, the more delicious it gets. And at this point, if you find that your sauce doesn't have enough flavor to it, say that it needed more meat flavor, you could put in some canned bouillon or even a bouillon cube, and then just keep tasting it. Maybe it needs a little more garlic, and then simmer it a little bit longer. And then, when you're sure that your sauce is just the way you'd like it to be, you pour it over your chicken. And there's our chicken. I'll get a little bit of this equipment out of the way. And then pour the sauce over it. And there we are. Now, your coq au vin is done, and you can do it ahead of time up to this point. You could do it a day ahead of time or 2 days ahead of time. You can see why restaurants like this recipe. And then you allow it to cool completely, and then you cover it. Always be sure when you're doing cooked foods, particularly meats and chicken, that you never cover anything unless it's either actually cooking or it's actually cold, because if you cover it while it's warm, very often it will sour. So you've finished your coq au vin to this point. Then when it's cool, you cover it and refrigerate it. And then when you're ready to go, you just reheat it slowly and put the cover on and let it reheat for about, 5 or 10 minutes. You don't want to overcook it. So now I'm going to serve it to you so you can see how it'll be. Get a nice, there's a piece of breast and some onions, and mushrooms, and a nice little bit of sauce. And then you can serve it just like this with green salad, but we're going to have some parsley potatoes and some green peas. And then with this, we're going to serve a nice red burgundy wine. Or you could use a Chianti or a Mountain Red if you wanted to. And there we are. And Boeuf Bourguignon is made exactly the same way as this. You use beef rather than chicken, and you brown it, and then you'd have to simmer it for 3 to 4 hours until it was done. But otherwise, it is exactly the same. And it's a perfectly delicious party dish also. So now you've learned 2 recipes for the price of 1, and you can open your own French restaurant with Boeuf Bourguignon and coq au vin on the menu. Bon appétit! That's all for today on The French Chef. This is Julia Child.
The French Chef is made possible by a grant from Safeway stores.